Last year, buses across the state of Kansas transported over 10 million rides. We are providing mobility throughout the state. From Colby to Kansas City, from Manhattan to Pittsburgh, transit providers offer services in 83% of Kansas counties, and that number of counties served is growing every year. Public transportation is vital to the stability and growth of our Kansas economy. Transit is an important economic development tool. Through state and federal funding, transit providers bring millions of dollars into our local economies every year. We partner with universities, community colleges, hospitals, charitable organizations, and businesses throughout the state to meet the growing demand for affordable transportation. Hundreds of Kansans are employed in the transit industry throughout the state, and as providers, we purchase goods and services that promote the local economies of the communities in which we live.
You know that all Kansans of all ages rely on transit. You see it every day in the jobs that you do and what you provide. You know how much this affects our economy and our jobs. It's just so important for so many people, keeping some of our elderly in their homes and allowing them to be able to live happy and productive lives. When people are happy and have that feeling of independence, they tend to be more healthy. It actually saves the state money. Appreciate all the work that you're doing on regional issues and local issues. I mean, the employers that are required to get to work, how you help folks get to work and help our workforce move around is very important. It's important that our state keeps state funding. Stay an active partner and keep pushing forward. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be here. I remember last year distinctly, and I think you have a bigger crowd this year, and I'm pleased to see that. That's really cool. And some of the weather isn't the best out there, we know, so some of you might have slipped and slid around just a bit in getting here this morning. Along with Vice Chair Timish and Ranking Minority Member Helgerson and the members of the House Transportation, thank you for showing your support for public transit. It's really an important piece of the transportation industry. As she mentioned, I got to co-chair the Transportation Vision Task Force with Senator McGinn, and we, along with dozens of task force members, traveled all across the state to hear what future transportation needs of Kansas were. And I want to tell you, at nearly every session that we had, transit was brought up. Paratransit, transit services, and transit. It's an important part, and we need to move forward, and we need to be looking at this at all times. The final report for the task force outlined important innovations and solutions for all modes of transportation and to upgrade our state infrastructure. Public transit is a key piece of the multimodal transportation network and will continue to be a key piece moving forward. You know, as businesses look at locating in an area, they look at transit access in consideration of where they're going to move their next facilities, and they also rely on the infrastructure for safe, reliable route for their goods and services. But something that really amazes me is the number of people that look at the transit in a city. They look at the bike paths, they look at all the services that are available, and they do this prior to finding a job. So they pick the city, and then they look for the job. And we're seeing more and more of that, and so it behooves all of us to be moving forward. So, you know, funding is a critical piece of the transportation recommendations, and we continue our forward movement on transportation, with transit being a vital part of that. And again, I welcome you to the Capitol. I'm so happy that you're all here, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Transit means mobility for Kansans. Kansans use transit to get to work. Transit means the difference between having a job and losing a job. Among employers, the lack of access to reliable transportation is often listed as a top reason for employee retention issues. I've heard from riders over the years testimonies how that reliable transportation every day means the difference between keeping that job, paying bills, buying groceries, paying rent, and unemployment. The unemployment rate for our persons with disabilities, according to the Department of Labor, is twice the rate of persons without disabilities. The lack of transportation options is one factor that contributes to that higher rate. For many years now, KDOT has exceeded the minimum ADA requirements in the procurement of our vehicles, and all providers in Kansas have vehicles that are accessible to persons with disabilities. As transit providers, we work every day to help meet the transportation needs of persons with disabilities. Public transportation contributes to the quality of life in Kansas. In growing numbers throughout both our rural and urban communities, seniors are choosing to age in place. Access to transportation is key to successfully doing so. Transit is literally a lifeline. In rural parts of our state, for example, access to health care can mean traveling hundreds of miles on a regular basis to access medical services. Without that transit trip, aging in place is simply not possible. Beyond health care, other quality of life issues, including trips to the grocery store, to the community center, to visiting friends over lunch, and remaining socially connected in the community.
On behalf of Secretary of Transportation Julie Lorenz, thank you to Representative Prahl and Senator Peterson. They're not here because they had to go vote on the floor. But anyway, and to our partners in public transit around the state, and to our local partners in cities and industries who value transit and its ability to improve lives and help economies grow. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to highlight some of the highlights from our transit program. Our program and our providers provide 10 million rides each year to Kansans of all ages and abilities. Kansas has seen a significant increase in ridership in just over a decade in both rural and urban areas. Our program and public transit providers provide access to health care, jobs, social services, daily needs, and much more. Access is important, but sometimes independence is the best outcome. Annually, KDOT awards $11 million in state transit funds that have been generously allocated by the legislature. With current industry figures coming in at 1 to 4 return on investment, that's for every $1 we invest, $4 of benefit comes back. Kansas economy is experiencing roughly $44 million in economic generation from the state public transit dollars alone. In 2018 alone, we've increased access to more funding for programs that serve seniors and people with disabilities. We've invested in transit infrastructure. We've lowered the local match requirement for mobility managers and making it easier for local governments to fund those positions across the state. KDOT's public transportation program is also laying the groundwork for the future of public transportation by making investments to improve access via ADA-compliant infrastructure, to take advantage of new technologies, including automated transit, to form collaborations to improve access to the entire transit network, to meet the unique needs of both rural and urban transit providers that serve Kansans daily. We are studying the potential for longer distance connections between regional cities. For example, between Salina and Manhattan, we're looking at connecting those cities in the Kansas State campuses. We are researching how electric and autonomous transit vehicles might best serve the needs of rural and urban communities in Kansas. We are working with our coordinated transit district network to establish 3 more mobility managers in the next 2 years, bringing our total to 5 across the state and covering half of Kansas. We look forward to partnering with you on these efforts, and a special thank you goes to the transit providers and the vendors that support all of our efforts. Your efforts on a daily basis are truly critical to the lives of many Kansans. And thank you for supporting Public Transit Day, braving the weather, as you've heard from everybody else. I know the weather's pretty bad out there, but thank you for coming and supporting public transit.
In the coming year, we are working together to create new regional connections, to use new technologies to improve efficiencies and expand services to meet the growing needs of our communities. The future of transit holds promise in Kansas that we will continue to serve and meet the ever-changing face of both rural and urban Kansans.